Hello everyone, what's up? Welcome back to the Race for Terra, your ultimate destination for tutorials, reviews, and all things related to painting and weathering, scale models, and wargame miniatures. Today I have a very special video for you, an interview with renowned sci-fi author Ian Watson. If you're a fan of Warhammer 40,000, you've likely heard of Ian Watson's Inquisitor and Space Marine. These two books were the two very first full-length explorations of the 40k universe before the Black Library even existed. We'll dive deep into Ian's experiences working with Games Workshop, including some of the more spicy moments, such as his struggle for creative freedom, his clashes with the higher-ups, and how his novels were even banned by GW at one stage. So, whether you're a longtime fan of Warhammer 40k, or just discovering the rich tapestry of this universe, stay tuned for an insightful and engaging conversation with one of its original architects. Good morning, Ian.
Good morning.
It was a pleasure and a privilege to meet you, finally.
It has been delightful meeting you each time we have bumped into each other here.
Here at the Celsius 232 Festival, and thank you very much for agreeing to this little interview. I've been looking forward to this for quite a few years, in fact.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
So, Ian, as I believe you already know, I read Inquisitor as a student.
Yes.
Back in Finland. In fact, I was an Erasmus student, and your Inquisitor novel in particular made a very lasting impression on me.
Good. One of the reasons why I write things is in order to make an impression upon people, rather than, for example, being forgotten the next week.
Well, I believe you managed that with many others besides myself. There's various reasons why I loved Inquisitor. One, I admire your prose very much, which I found very unique and different to other sci-fi novels that I read at the time.
It's all the Latin that I put in. Or Imperial Gothic.
Imperial Gothic,
as
right.
we refer to it.
And I also found many of the characters and themes quite unique, like, forgive my mispronunciation, perhaps Jack Draco or Draco?
Well, however you like, there's no point in trying to pronounce words correctly because well, you have to go with the flow. I call him Jack Draco.
Okay, so can I ask you, what was your inspiration, if any, for Jack Draco, as it seems a rather unique personality? He
needed some inherent traits built in, such as fidelity to the Emperor and belief in the system. So, I mean, unfortunately, he's a witch hunter. So I start by thinking of insane monks of the Middle Ages who are going out to find witches and torture them to death. Now, in the Warhammer world, there are objective psychic evil powers at large in the universe who are corrupting and possessing their disciples. And so it's much more objective. And also Jack Draco doesn't go around using individual violence and sticking knives into witches. He exterminates complete planets.
Right.
Exterminatus!
As one does, of course.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, you can do in the game, you know. I mean, it's, do I regard him as a hero? Yes, he's definitely a step far up on the witch hunters of the Inquisition. You know, far improved beyond them.
The prologue to Inquisitor famously starts with the phrase, "Believe me, I intend to tell the truth as I experienced it." And then in the epilogue, there's a librarian who questions whether it was even Draco who wrote the whole thing. As a reader, I found this very interesting because it's basically about the unreliability of the narrator, I believe.
Yes.
What made you choose that as a technique, if you like?
Well, it's good when you're starting off writing a book in totally unknown circumstances, because this was the first ever 40k novel.
Yes, it was.
Never done before. So you know, cover your ass slightly in case you step in the doo-doo. too often or too many times, it acts as a control mechanism there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, speaking of it being the first 40k novel ever, it seemed to me when I first read it that there were a lot of sexual elements in the novel, some implicit, some more explicit, and this may be really surprising for new readers now. It wasn't for me at the time. I don't think current Black Library stories have those elements. So can I ask you what motivated you to include, let's say, sexual elements in the story?
Well, normal reality. Also, the audience at the time for these first novels were goths who were 20 years old, 21 years old, with rings through their noses and tattoos on their breasts. And, I imagine that they also engaged in some sexual capers as well. So this was really normality, but it's controlled in my book. For example, Jack Draco only makes sacred love once with the female assassin,
Yes.
Melindy. And I mean, that's it's rather like in ancient Babylon, when it was the legal duty of every young woman to go and sit in the temple of Ishtar. So this is the sort of different understanding of sex to what we have
Right.
nowadays. And it is worth exploring. On the many worlds of the Imperium, there are bound to be all sorts of different social customs. And heresies even.
Hence requiring inquisitors, of course. Your novel was, of course, the first text that really brought the 40k universe into life for me and for many other readers. Before that, we only had things like video games, magazines, and the like. But I also kind of sensed at the time that there was a lot in the book that was basically idiosyncratically yours, Ian Watson's, rather than just generic Warhammer stuff, right? To what extent did you have creative freedom when writing the book?
Well, number one, I was enabled by the Warhammer 40k background to write space opera, which I had loved reading when I was younger and never thought that I would be capable of writing or having a way to write. There was that, and I had a huge amount of creative freedom because of the then owner of Games Workshop, Brian Ansell, whose desire it was to read, quote, real novels by real authors set in his beloved Warhammer domains. And the advice that I had from Brian Ansell by email, I think it was about how to describe more lovingly the functioning of weapons, the noises that they made, the sensuality. People later objected that my book was too universal, covering the whole of the Imperium, because now the single episode events on single worlds
Right.
provide endless opportunities for more and more books. Mine was too comprehensive, but as an initial guide to the Warhammer world, I think you have to be a bit comprehensive, otherwise
Yes.
you've no idea what's going on.
And a bit of traveling as well, right?
Oh yes, well, travelling insofar as the inside of a spacecraft is in the slightest bit interesting. But other worlds. What kind of space drive do they use? I can't remember, to get from A to B. Jack Draco, his ship, I mean he has a personal ship,
Of course.
as an Inquisitor would, the Tormentum Malorum, the Scourge of Evil. I can't remember exactly how it is powered. Oh, wait a minute, it has Grim as the chief engineer. Which one is the chief engineer? Is it Vitali or is it Grim the Squat?
Vitali, I believe.
Vitali, yeah. Well, that's a bit of a weird name, so it'll be some kind of weird Alcubierre space drive, probably.
Right.
But I didn't go into that because you could put too much into a book and overload people. With Star Trek novels, I did hugely admire one by Barbara Hambly, real novelist, who wrote a real science fiction novel with a real functioning starship and blah, 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 blah. It was so authentic compared with a lot of the other idiot adventures. But anyway, never mind them.
Speaking of Hambly, she's also at the Celsius this year, I believe.
Yes, she is, that's right. I must say this to her. Because I was thinking of writing a Star Trek book because I ran out of money, as one does. I sent an email to John Ordover, who was in charge of the program at the time, and he was very welcoming and sent me the bibliography of Babel, just as I received from Games Workshop. The reason why I did Warhammer 40k and was left alone to do it was because Brian Ansell asked David Pringle, the editor of Britain's best science fiction magazine, Interzone, if he would search and commission from his own stable of writers. And lo, he did so, and all the buggers chose to write normal medieval fantasy and just put in Warhammer books, names. So when I came to realize that I was going to have to bite the bullet, but in a very descriptive, luscious way, there was only 40k left. And so I got the mountain of texts, the sacred texts, and read them, and as one had to do.
Right, with the lore, as it were.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about Space Marine.
Oh, yes.
Now, Space Marine came out in '93, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 years after Inquisitor. I also loved it, of course. And it seemed to me like there was quite a bit of let's say, homoerotic tension between some of the characters.
Hanky-panky. Well, yeah,
I assume this was intentional?
Oh, yes, because you take a Citadel miniature. How do you endow that with any character, personality, or psychology? And so I thought I will put in a homoerotic subtext. Because after all, what are these superhuman guys doing in their battle monasteries? They're probably neuter completely. Well, if I was designing battle monasteries for Space Marines, they would actually be motivationally and even physically neuter, but not the way I wanted to do it. What happened, of course, was that I sent the book when I finished to Games Workshop Nottingham. By this time, Brian Ansell had been overthrown as emperor.
Oh my!
And there'd been a palace revolution, and games designers were much more in control. So they said, Ian is going to have to make major changes to this book. Really major changes. Fortunately, at that moment, the relationship between Nottingham and Pringle in Brighton broke down, and there was a 9-month interregnum in which this is why there's so much gap in between, in which Games Workshop was searching for a book packager to publish the Games Workshop books, and they finally found Boxtree, which jolly good as a book packager and innovative too. And nobody in the meantime told Boxtree that Ian needed to make major changes. And I didn't say anything about it either.
I see.
So the book was published exactly as I wrote it, with homoerotic subtext, which actually contributed to its popularity, I would say. I've seen photographs of people lecturing with glee about the kind of buggeration impact of a Space Marine weapon into the backside of a Tyranid vessel,
Right.
ripping open its anus and shut up, Ian. This is a family program.
Not really.
Games, yeah, I know. Games Workshop were not very pleased with this. So my next book, which was Harlequin, Box Tree innovatively thought of having a special large format hardback collector's edition. Which is a clever idea. You can charge more money for it
Yes.
and whatnot. So they produced initially my Harlequin in this special, gorgeous hardback collector's edition. And I went to Games Day in Birmingham, and lots of copies I signed. And I will not mention the name, but he of power came up to me and said, after about an hour, "So how's it going?" And I said, "I sold them all." And he said, "Oh, really?" Now, I thought he would be pleased
Right.
at these massive sales.
But he wasn't.
No, he proceeded to ban the sale of the hardback collector's edition from from all Games Workshop shops.
Wow.
Because it was not cost effective. A big cardboard box with plastic sprues retailing at £60 was money for old rope. Whereas those books, the excuse was the shelves are the wrong size.
The shelves are the wrong size.
Yes. That was the excuse I was given. But unfortunately, at this same time, W.H. Smith decided to ban from their shops any Games Workshop books in a town where there was a Games Workshop shop. So my book was doubly banned. First of all by its publishers, and then by the largest retail outfit. Nevertheless, onward we struggled, defiant, but bloody but unbowed.
Did this collector's edition ever see the light of day?
Oh yes.
Yes?
There's a collector's edition and also of Chaos Child. And they are beautiful volumes.
Unbeknownst to me, I would very much like to possess some.
You can probably make me an offer because I probably have some spare copies.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, well, I'll make a special offer for you, Scott.
In the GW publications of the 90s, like magazines and stuff, and also in the actual rule books of Warhammer and so on, I think there was quite a lot of like tongue-in-cheek humor, and this is notably absent now. I also thought that there was quite a bit of humorous subtext, regardless of sex or not, in your 40k novels. In some cases, it seemed to me at the time, as a young reader, that you were maybe kind of, in a way, taking the piss.
Well,
Was I right?
Well, let us just say that there are grotesque, surrealistic aspects which one could regard with hilarity or horror mixed together.
Right.
In, for example, some of the mutated devotees of the Chaos Gods. And also it makes it more fun to read, in my opinion.
Indeed.
I have not followed what has been happening with Games Workshop. I am aware that some triple-size super fighter warriors have now been brought in, and they're 3 meters tall or 4 meters tall.
Yes.
And this makes a nonsense of the special nature of Space Marines, in my humble opinion, but who cares about that?
Mine also, as it happens. Perhaps in connection with that, your 40k novels are now labeled non-canon by GW due to later retcons that took place. However, for many fans like myself, your novels represent the true canon, if you like, of a universe that was not yet excessively meddled with.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. I totally agree with you. But I would recommend Danny Ware. as a modern writer, just because she's a friend of mine, and she runs, or ran for a long time, Forbidden Planet, the shop in London.
Yes.
And she's
Very
dealing
nice
with female Space Marines, Adeptes, Sorores.
Sororitas. Yeah.
I was going to say that, and then it sounded like a genitive too far. Yeah, I just put in a puff for Danny. Hello, Danny. I'm propagandizing you.
Very well. I was going to ask you, what's your stance on the issue of retcons in any fictional universe, really?
Well, I think it is absurd because the borderline between those and censorship is a very narrow one.
Very interesting.
And as soon as you let people alter old texts for whatever reason, then you're just opening the floodgates to falsification, which does nobody any good. I mean, well, it started with Bowdlerization by Mr. Bowdler or Dr. Bowdler even, in the 19th century. And it got worse and worse, and no, I deeply disapprove of bringing things up to date. Because up to what date? Everything is of its date. I mean, my Warhammer books are of the 1960s.
Right.
And 70s, rather, because I wrote most of them in the 70s. But it is the spirit of the 60s and 70s. And the Underground Press, for example, Oz Magazine, rather than Arms and Armour Monthly, to invent a title, maybe a real title.
I believe that Inquisitor, at the very least, was heavily altered by GW after its initial publication. For example, the issue of the squats, like Grim disappearing from the setting.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Inquisitor. It was one of my short stories, which was called Warped Stars, and it was in a book. Sorry, my nose is itchy. It was in a book edited by Pringle, where Grim the Squat was the comic relief, and the GW, or the games designers, changed him to boring Grill the tech priest, who had no value at all. They must have realized this. I did not protest, but they changed it back in a subsequent edition of the anthology. They didn't tamper with, so far as I know, they didn't tamper with the major novels.
Let us hope I'm wrong then. Good.
Well, once you start tampering, it's a big job.
Indeed.
I mean, you can tamper with a short story by saying, find Grim, substitute grill.
Could you discuss with us your eventual departure, so to speak, from Games Workshop and any significant reasons behind it?
Well, there wasn't a departure, actually, because I was writing other things. People were asking if I would write a final tie-up Warhammer novel, because Inquisitor, book 4, because one of my characters was lost in the Eldar webway.
Right.
Another one was mad, stark raving loony. Another one was dead. I mean, that's no problem to an inventive writer.
No.
But I would not be allowed to do it, you see, because I could only do it using the tech of the time when I wrote the first books. And I would not take on board 20-foot tall giants romping around. So it's actually impossible. And also they own the copyright, Games Workshop. They pay me money for sales, but they own the moral rights, which I gave up. We all gave up the moral rights. But I was more immoral than others, so you see me.
So an eventual sequel, much as we fans might like it, is basically impossible?
Well, it is impossible also because of the copyright factor. You see, everything in there is actually copyright Games Workshop.
Right.
I remember when I was pirated, when my trilogy was pirated in Hungary, I had an email from a bibliographer in Hungary, and he said, "Psst, do you know that your Inquisitor is now in Hungarian?" I said, "No, I don't."
Oh, wow.
And so he sent me photocopies of the initial pages with Hungarian translation, Copyright Games Workshop, everything, Copyright Games Workshop. And I sent these copies of these pages to GW and said, "Ahem." And they said, "Ian, we are too chaotic to be dishonest." And then I got paid for this.
Well, all's well. That ends well.
Yeah, except I don't know which other countries I might have been sold in.
Inadvertently.
I think I would have heard by now.
Hopefully. So, Ian, it's been over 30 years since you published Inquisitor, for example.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel now about the impact that that small segment of your work has had on people like us? Like me?
Well, I'm actually thrilled and delighted. The majority of my fan enthusiasm comes from 40k people. You will note that I used my own name on the books, whereas all the other writers used pseudonyms,
right,
in order to distance slightly their precious selves from contamination by popular culture. And I was proud of what I did, and so I think I reap the benefit of that.
Speaking of fans, we all know that they can be a little bit rabid sometimes. Have you had any memorable interactions, either positive or negative, with fans throughout the years?
Well, only by a post where I got some really rabid messages from the USA.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, it's amusing to talk about. One guy who had, I can't quote it quite from memory, but it was memorably filled with the desire to come to England and smash my face in because I had fucked with his head. That was the expression. There was only a moderate amount of that. The majority of fan mail was quite pleasant, and I replied to it. But in person, I have not been attacked. Spain is very safe because the fans are very polite and orderly.
Speaking of Spain and Asturias in northern Spain, where we are,
yes,
the Celsius 232 Festival has become quite a significant event for sci-fi and fantasy fans both. How does it feel to be a part of this festival, and what do you enjoy the most about it?
Oh, I enjoy it. Well, I have three jobs. One of which is to liaise with and assist, if necessary, invited guests who are monolingual,
Mm-hmm.
and just to tell them, for instance, go down to that restaurant and ask for some cider and see what happens. My second job is to, and this also involves communicating by email with people. My second job, which is the most important one, is weather control, because the festival is in the open air, and it must not suffer rain. And since I obtained the staff of Cthulhu, El Todo Poderoso, I've been able to control. Now, last year and the year before, 6 days of festival, not a drop of rain, not even a put-a-goat during the events of the festival. Now, skeptics who are a nuisance will come up and say, "I looked out of the window at 4 in the morning and there was some rain." Well, fuck it, there you have to release it somewhere. The majority of the rain I release over Oviedo, the city, because it's far too pompous as a place, and
deserving.
Pico, and also it's smaller than my seaside hometown of Gijón.
As a linguist myself, a philologist, I have found your very first novel, The Embedding, really fascinating. I had never encountered a sci-fi novel before with such a heavy emphasis on language as a part of the plot, really.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what led you to write The Embedding?
Well, there had been science fiction writers like Jack Vance who wrote a book called The Languages of Power, which was all based on linguistic relativism of...
Chomsky and so on?
No, of Worf and Sapir and Worf.
Oh, really?
That was the dominant
That
point of view.
Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
A
Yes.
hypothesis, which was that the language that you spoke conditioned your view of reality.
Exactly.
There was nothing about Chomsky's
Universal language.
universal language and innate generative grammar and blah blah blah, which was much more science fiction. No, I thought.
Agreed.
I threw myself in with naive enthusiasm to this, and I won't say whether I might have been right or wrong, or half wrong or half right or whatnot. But anyway, the story carried it along. And why was it set in the Amazon, which is now, 50 years later, being flooded and destroyed?
Yes, indeed.
Just as in the embedding, because I was reading American think tank reports from the Hudson Institute.
Ian, let me ask you about what you see as your legacy. Looking back on your career, what are you most proud of?
Affecting people's brains, affecting people's heads.
So, Ian, your latest novel, The Monster, the Mermaid, and Dr. Mengele, I was afraid of mispronouncing that.
I did listen to a German pronunciation tape for his name especially, and it is Josef Mengele.
Right.
Not Mengele.
Yes. Well, I believe it combines historical fiction with fantastical elements.
Yes, it's an alternative to the Frankenstein legend, where Victor Frankenstein actually does create a mate for the monster, the monster is not a monster. He's a perfectly nice gentleman almost, and he's only selectively killing people who might alter Victor Frankenstein's mind about this. So, Scottish Island, which is where they are in the book, Victor agrees that he will make a mate, and then that the monster, so his name is revealed, his true name is revealed.
Right.
Will go to South American jungles and hide there, which, as in Mary Shelley's novel. Well, basically on that Scottish island there are only about 10 male fishermen and one female person who's not allowed to go to sea because she would bring bad luck to the boats.
Right.
But she does get swept off by a wave and drowned, which provides a female brain in the graveyard to use. He has to use local materials, really, such as seals and tuna. This results in a mermaid. And so off to happiness in the jungles of South America until the coming of the Nazis fleeing from the consequences of the Second World War. I deal with this, the intersection of what is a monster. Mengele is a monster, but he's a very feeble monster. In The Boys from Brazil, which is a kind of take on Mengele, this super scientist, Nazi scientist, is protected by packs of Doberman pinschers. In reality, Mengele was accompanied by about a dozen mongrels that were bags of bones on sticks, starving. And, this is the difference between the reality and the myth which grew up. So I deal with that. Now that's already been translated into Spanish.
I was just going to ask about that.
Oh, yeah. And people are quite enthusiastic about it. Me and the missus have been touring different places around Spain and promoting it in bookshops. Oh, yeah, but my most recent book, published in English next month at the World Convention in Glasgow, is called New Adventures of a Chinese Time Machine. And it is actually my full technical novel in 20 years, because it's over 50,000 words. And I've already sold it to Poland, and where it's going to be longer, because I add on a different story.
Okay.
And the Polish translator said, yes, it can be translated. So, this fills me with great hope. And it is a complex, sardonic, but respectful of China book. It's not one of these rehashed CIA propaganda about how the Uyghurs are kept in concentration camps, and that's CIA recycled bollocks. Shut up! Anyway, it will not please anybody really, the book, because, for instance, it reveals the truth about pandas, which are a sacred icon.
I see.
And this is bollocks. It's true that they are icons, but stick your finger into that can of pandas. Yeah, anybody in Oxford will hate it.
In Oxford?
Well, yeah, that is because by the year 2050, Brexit land has collapsed totally and is administered benevolently by the Chinese. So, for time travel, they use Oxford dons because they have to wear 19th century naval and military costumes to overawe.
Right.
The Chinese can't cut the mustard because due to the opium wars and other reasons, they are in their century of humiliation and shame, and nobody would pay attention to anything that a Chinese person did. But British military, with orders forged in 2050, perfectly, they can't be questioned. And other parties in the French Revolution, because the time machine is hijacked by a Japanese porn publisher who has a neck fetishist. This is perfectly normal.
Of course.
And they have all sorts of fetish magazines about bondage and so forth. And his obsession is he wants to see Marie Antoinette's head cut off. By getting to Paris in time.
Very well. I shall make sure to pick it up.
Yes, you'll have to order it from Newcon Press, because I let my books. I don't have a major publisher. Well, now this is not true. I do, but they ignore me. It was their 50th anniversary last year, and it was the 50th anniversary of my novel, The Embedding, and they totally ignored this.
Wow.
Because they're too obsessed with publishing high fantasy, because it sells copies.
Right.
So, piss that.
Well, let's hope to see wisdom. Thank you very much for having us, Ian.
No, not at all. We can continue talking to us as well,
Yes.
To each other, I think. Okay.
It's been a pleasure and a privilege,
and
sir.
I have not coughed, and I have not sneezed.
No, you have not.
And I have not even needed recourse to water.
Or the staff.
Well, the power is here,
Yes. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. As a special thank you to our community, I'm excited to announce that I'll be giving away not 1, but 5 signed and dedicated first edition copies of Ian Watson's iconic novels to some of my Patreon supporters. These are rare pieces of Warhammer history, personally signed by Ian himself. If you'd like to support the channel and get a chance to win one of these signed books, head over to my Patreon page. Your support means a lot to me, and it helps me continue to create content every month. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, keep it up and weather it out.